You've probably heard uh, the most common piece of career advice in the world, and that is just be yourself.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's printed on coffee mugs. It's the thesis of like 1,000 self-help books, and it sounds incredibly reassuring. But according to researchers at the Harvard Business Review, if you actually follow that advice when stepping into a new leadership role, it could completely derail your career.
It is the absolute definition of a well-intentioned trap. I mean, when you want to build a deck, you follow a blueprint, right?
Right.
But when you step into the world of executive presence, the development landscape isn't a blueprint. It's just a sticky note with a platitude that completely ignores the complexities of human dynamics.
And that is exactly why we are here today. The mission of this deep dive is to decode the true meaning of authentic leadership and executive presence. We are unpacking a massive stack of sources featuring research from heavyweights like Daniel Goleman, Herminia Ibarra, and Amy J.C. Cuddy.
It's a great lineup.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because advice like just be yourself or chase success is everywhere. But as you are about to see, it often backfires spectacularly in practice. Today, we're going to guide you on how to align your goals with your core values, filter out all that external noise, and project a presence that actually connects with people.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with this idea of being authentic. Why is being yourself so dangerous when you step into a new environment?
Well, the danger comes from how rigidly we define authenticity. Herminia Ibarra's research dismantles this brilliantly through what she calls the authenticity paradox. We tend to think of authenticity as, adhering to one's static true self.
Like maintaining this unfiltered transparency between what we feel and what we say.
Exactly. But when you advance in your career, the demands of your environment change. If you stubbornly stick to the behaviors that feel comfortable and natural to you in that exact moment, you actually hinder your personal growth.
So it really comes down to adaptability. I know Ibarra divides people into two psychological profiles,
Uh-huh.
the chameleons and the true-to-selfers, but I'd love to know how those actually play out in the real world.
Yeah, let's look at the true to selfers first. These are low self-monitors. They want to express exactly what they think and feel in any given situation, even if it runs completely counter to what the environment requires.
Right.
The sources share this incredible anecdote about Cynthia, a general manager in a healthcare organization. She was a classic true to selfer, and when she got promoted, her direct reports increased tenfold.
Oh, wow, that's a massive jump.
Massive. She felt understandably shaky and, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of her new responsibilities. So she took the full disclosure route.
Which means what, exactly?
Well, she sat down with her new team, totally bared her soul, and basically said, I want to do this job, but it's scary, and I need your help.
Honestly, that sounds so refreshing. I mean, we are always told that vulnerability is a superpower in leadership. Why wouldn't that work?
Because she fundamentally misunderstood what her team actually needed in that specific moment. Her transparency completely destroyed her credibility.
Wait, really? It destroyed it.
Yeah. Instead of building trust, she made her team question her baseline ability to do the job. Her team didn't need a vulnerable friend right then. They needed a confident, authoritative leader to take charge and provide a sense of stability during a massive transition.
Ah, I see.
By oversharing, she prioritized her own need for emotional expression over her team's need for security.
Wait, so if the true-to-selfer approach fails, are we saying the chameleons have it right? Because that feels like the exact opposite of authenticity.
How so?
Well, that feels like fake it till you make it, like wearing someone else's clothes, putting on an act, and hoping nobody notices the tag. How is being a chameleon not just being a fraud?
What's fascinating here is that authenticity isn't about rigid transparency. It is about managing the inherent tension between authority and approachability. We all have many selves, depending on our roles. I mean, you act differently with your best friend than you do with your grandmother, but you are still authentically you in both scenarios. The chameleons, who are high self-monitors, intuitively understand that stepping into a new role requires learning. And learning inherently involves trying on unnatural behaviors at first.
So it's not about being fake, it's about stretching your capacity. Cynthia made herself too approachable and vulnerable, and it undermined her authority because she couldn't stretch into the authoritative role her team needed.
Precisely. Because she viewed her authentic self as a monument that couldn't be altered. The chameleons recognize that their identity is a work in progress. They care about their public impact, and they keep trying on different styles until they find a good fit for the new demands placed upon them.
But wait, if you're constantly adapting your behavior to fit the room like a chameleon, how do you keep from losing your own identity entirely? If you're always adjusting the dials, you'd need some kind of internal anchor.
You absolutely need an anchor. And that leads us to the concept of finding your true north. Let's actually take a brief orientation to this space because aligning your goals with your core values, it's a lived practice. It's not just some corporate ideology.
Right.
This is about presence-driven leadership. True authenticity doesn't come from external validation. It comes from deep internal alignment. Bill George's work on authentic leadership focuses heavily on this shift.
Yeah, I've read some of George's work, and the big pivot he emphasizes is moving away from extrinsic rewards to intrinsic motivations.
That shift is foundational. Extrinsic rewards are things like chasing a massive salary, elevated status, or a prestigious title. Those are fleeting and entirely dependent on the whims of other people.
Whereas intrinsic motivations are,
Intrinsic motivations are things like personal growth, helping others, or making a tangible difference in the world. Intrinsic motivations are naturally congruent with your core values, which provides much deeper, sustainable fulfillment in your work.
but let's be honest, that requires immense discernment. It is so easy to get caught up in external expectations. You have social pressures, peer comparisons, parental expectations that measure success purely by material accumulation. How do you actually filter out that noise?
It requires a high degree of internal authority and taking responsibility over your own reactivity. You have to clearly understand what brings you fulfillment rather than chasing what others define as success. So if you're listening right now, whether you're commuting or doing the dishes, let's actually take a second to bring this into your lived practice.
I love that. Let's do it.
Let's just invite a few seconds of silence right now, just a reflective pause to settle in.
Yeah, just take a breath.
Now, think about your current professional goals. How often do those goals actually reflect your deepest, quietest values? Rather than what your boss, your industry, or your family expects of you, I invite you to bring that insight into your ongoing community dialogue.
That is a heavy, grounded reflection question. Because it's one thing to sit quietly and identify your values, but it's an entirely different beast when a pressure is on and those values get tested in the real world.
And they will be tested. I mean, the sources highlight John Huntsman, who worked in the Nixon administration. This is a profound historical example of internal authority overriding external pressure.
Right.
In 1972, he was asked by H.R. Haldeman, who was essentially the second most powerful person in the country at the time, to help entrap a congressman.
The pressure in that room must have been suffocating.
Unimaginable. Huntsman initially didn't fully process the magnitude of the request in the moment, but within 15 minutes of leaving that meeting, his inner moral compass kicked in.
Wow.
He recognized it was wrong. Despite the immense career risk, he refused to use his employees that way, and he told Haldeman no. He left the administration within 6 months. Your values are just theories until they are tested under fire.
It's the ultimate stress test of your true north. And the sources also mention Daniel Vasella, the former CEO of Novartis.
Yes, another compelling example. He endured extreme challenges in his youth, severe illness, the early loss of family members. But rather than adopting a victim mentality, he practiced deep discernment.
He used those experiences.
Exactly. He reframed those traumatic formative experiences to find a passionate intrinsic motivation for healing and leading. He took his core value of concern for others and translated it into actionable leadership principles that guided a massive pharmaceutical company.
That makes perfect sense conceptually, but it's easy to say, follow your values. How do you actually translate a fuzzy, feel-good value like concern for others into a concrete goal when the pressure is on? Especially when you're stepping into a brand new environment where you don't feel entirely confident yet.
You do it by fundamentally shifting how you frame success. You must prioritize learning goals over performance goals. When you take on a new role, the natural instinct is to set a performance goal.
A performance goal focuses on proving to everyone else that you already possess certain skills, right? Which sounds like a recipe for disaster if you're new to a position. If you don't fully have those skills yet, you're basically setting a psychological trap for yourself. You immediately trigger imposter syndrome because you're trying to prove you are an expert in something you literally just started doing.
That's the exact trap. And the way out of it is shifting to a learning goal. A learning goal motivates you to actively develop those attributes. You are no longer trying to prove you are perfect. You are trying to prove you are growing.
I love that distinction.
It ties directly into Daniel Goleman's framework of emotional intelligence, specifically the pillars of self-awareness and self-regulation. A self-aware leader knows their limits. They don't pretend to know everything. Instead, they use a playful frame of mind to experiment with what Herminia Ibarra calls possible selves.
So instead of acting like an Olympic gymnast who has to stick the landing perfectly on the first try to prove their worth, I should treat this like I'm a scientist in a lab, where the whole point is to run experiments and learn from the explosions.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, treating your leadership journey like a laboratory completely shifts your neurological response to stress. A learning mindset allows you to evolve your professional identity without feeling like you are compromising your core values.
It takes the pressure off.
Completely. It removes the psychological threat of failure. When you aren't terrified of making a mistake, your brain isn't locked in fight or flight mode. You can actually listen to feedback, regulate your disruptive emotions, and adapt. You stop vigorously protecting your old, comfortable self, and you start actively exploring the leader you might become.
Okay, so we have the internal alignment set. We know our intrinsic values. We are filtering out the external noise. And we have our scientist lab coat on with a learning mindset. But all of this internal work has to translate outward eventually. People still need to see you as a leader.
Naturally.
I know Amy Gensu talks about an ACE framework for finding your signature voice, but how does that actually work in practice?
The ACE framework breaks down the mechanics of executive presence into three actionable areas: assumptions, communication, and energy. Let's start with A for assumptions. This is the mental conditioning phase. It's about continually updating your understanding of the unique value you bring to the table.
So dealing with your own inner critic.
Yes. If you operate under the internal assumption that you don't belong in the room, your body language, your pacing, and your tone will inadvertently broadcast that insecurity to everyone else.
You have to assume you have value before anyone else will believe it. What about C for communication?
Communication in this framework is about balancing your voice for self, which is how you structure and advocate for your own ideas, with your voice for others, which is how you listen. Seek identifies three distinct levels of listening surface: issues-based and emotions-based listening.
Those sound like they escalate in difficulty. Can you give me an example of how they differ in a real scenario?
Sure. Let's imagine an employee comes to you complaining about a missed project deadline. Surface listening just takes the words at face value. You hear, "We needed more time."
Okay, straightforward.
Right. Issues-based listening cuts through the emotional clutter to find the core logistical problem. You hear, "We have a bottleneck in the approval process." But emotions-based listening, the highest level, is uncovering the true agendas by reading the nonverbal cues.
Ah,
You hear the hesitation in their voice and realize they are actually terrified of their project manager and don't feel psychologically safe speaking up.
that is incredibly nuanced. And I imagine if you don't balance advocating for your ideas with that deep level of listening, you fall into some pretty ineffective defaults.
You do. You either get the overly confrontational, driving voice, where you just steamroll people and ignore the emotional subtext, or you fall into the overly passive, supportive voice, where you shrink away and don't advocate for yourself at all.
And neither is great.
Right. Neither of those is a true signature voice. And what constitutes a strong presence has completely evolved over the last decade. The research comparing 2012 to 2022 on executive presence is staggering.
How much could it really change in just 10 years?
Dramatically. In 2012, executive presence was heavily associated with a polished look, physical attractiveness, and commanding a room. It was a very rigid, almost theatrical, top-down archetype.
Very traditional corporate.
Exactly. But by 2022, the societal shift toward collaborative work environments and remote teams completely changed the criteria. The top traits shifted toward authenticity, inclusiveness, and a listen-to-learn orientation. The modern leader isn't the loudest person in the room. They're the most observant and adaptable.
Here's where it gets really interesting, but I have to ask about that last letter in the ACE framework. How does the E energy actually look in practice? How do you manage energy without it just sounding like a vague, mystical concept?
Energy in this context isn't mystical at all. It is highly physiological and practical. It is about maintaining a calm, stable equilibrium. It's like being in turbulence on an airplane.
Oh, I hate turbulence.
Most people do. And if the flight attendant looks panicked, rushing up and down the aisle with wide eyes, every passenger instantly panics. But if the flight attendant is calmly pouring coffee and chatting, your brain registers that you are safe, even if the plane is shaking violently.
That is such a vivid image. Your physical state dictates the emotional state of the room.
Absolutely. Think about a leader who enters a room frantic, firing off emails on their phone and speaking rapidly. That erratic energy triggers a threat response in their team's nervous systems.
Oh, I've had bosses like that. It's exhausting.
It really is. Conversely, a leader who walks in, makes eye contact, breathes steadily, and pauses before speaking projects a grounded energy. It balances internal strength with external approachability, directly impacting how psychologically safe a team feels to share their ideas.
Which naturally brings us to connection, because that perfectly managed energy is the foundation for the most important external trait of all warmth. Before anyone cares about your competence, they have to trust your intentions.
This flips traditional leadership advice completely on its head. Machiavelli famously said it is better to be feared than loved. But behavioral science, specifically the research by Amy J.C. Cuddy, proves that is entirely wrong in the modern workplace.
Also,
From an evolutionary standpoint, when we judge others, our brains subconsciously look for two things: warmth, which translates to trustworthiness, and competence, which translates to strength.
and evolutionary survival dictates we look for warmth first, right? We need to know if someone is a friend or a foe before we care how strong they are.
Exactly the mechanism at play. And the sources are very clear on what happens if you get the order wrong in the workplace. If you lead with strength and competence first, without establishing warmth, you elicit fear or envy.
Because they see you as a threat.
Right. People might comply outwardly because they have to keep their jobs, but they won't truly follow you or share their best ideas. But if you lead with warmth, you facilitate trust. You neurologically open people up, creating an environment where the absorption of complex ideas is actually possible.
Cuddy talks about the concept of the happy warrior. These are leaders who face troubles without being troubled.
The classic example given is former Texas Governor Ann Richards. She paired immense assertiveness with a big smile and a quick wit. By showing she didn't let the rough and tumble political environment get her down, she inherently reassured her constituents. Her warmth made her strength palatable.
And Emma Sebela's research takes this even further into vulnerability and forgiveness. She tells the story of Arkana Pacharajan, a boss who built immense, almost unbreakable loyalty. When her employees made mistakes, she didn't fly off the handle and trigger that fight-or-flight response.
Right.
She patiently encouraged their growth and gave them time to analyze and fix the situation.
That is what Goffey and Jones call tough empathy. It means caring intensely about the work, but also caring intensely about the people doing the work. Elaine Levy, the former CEO of Polygram, is a brilliant example of this.
What did he do?
He was known as an intimidating, somewhat aloof intellectual. But he closed the distance with his team by flying to Australia and sitting down on the floor with junior executives to help them pick singles off albums.
Why did sitting on the floor make such a difference?
Because he physically bypassed the corporate hierarchy. He got into the weeds with them out of pure passion for the music. He signaled, "I care about the actual work as much as you do."
That's powerful.
Very. That simple shared physical action neurologically shifted his team's perception of him from a distant, fearful figure to a trusted collaborator. He empathized fiercely by sharing their exact challenges.
I get that warmth is nice, and sitting on the floor to pick out music singles sounds great. But I have to push back a little here. Doesn't leading with warmth and vulnerability run the risk of making you look weak? Or worse, inviting pity from your team because they think you can't handle the hard stuff?
This raises an important question because the research does acknowledge that warmth without competence elicits pity. If you are incredibly nice but entirely incapable of doing your job, people will feel compassion for you, but they will ultimately neglect your leadership.
Right.
The magic happens when warmth is paired with competence. When you are highly skilled and highly grounded, your warmth isn't a sign of weakness, it is a sign of ultimate confidence. It creates a positive feedback loop where your team views your leadership not as a threat to be managed, but as a vital resource to be utilized.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We've covered a massive amount of ground today. We learned that the old advice to rigidly just be yourself is a trap that ignores your potential for growth. True alignment requires filtering out external noise to find your intrinsic values and then translating them into actionable principles.
Absolutely.
We discovered that treating your career like a scientist's laboratory, focusing on learning goals over performance goals, is the ultimate cure for imposter syndrome. And we saw that true executive presence in the modern world requires finding your signature voice, managing your energy like a calm flight attendant in turbulence, and remembering that warmth must always precede strength. You truly don't have to choose between being highly successful and being a deeply connected, good human being.
And as you step back into your day, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. If our identities are constantly evolving as we learn and grow, if we are all scientists in the lab of our own lives, what if the most authentic version of yourself isn't who you are right now, but the person you are courageous enough to become next?
That is the perfect place to leave it. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep experimenting, keep growing, and we will catch you next time.